She called him just the janitor until his daughter exposed the code. Her billion-dollar empire missed. I used to design firewalls that could stop a nation-state. Miles Turner ran the mop across the polished marble eyes still locked on the reflection of the Fortune 500 logos glowing from the glass wall ahead. Now I clean floors for the people who didn't listen. The night guard chuckled not unkindly but clearly used to this kind of late-shift poetry. You talk to your mop like it's going to talk back one day. Miles offered a weary smile. It already has. It just said, get over yourself and wipe harder. The lobby of Marchand Global shimmered with the kind of modern elegance only billionaires could afford imported quartz cold lighting furniture designed to impress, not comfort. Everything screamed power. But Miles. He barely whispered now. He dipped the mop again, wrung it out with practiced ease, and glanced at the surveillance camera in the upper corner. He'd designed systems like that once. Back when his name still meant something. Back when he still had a marriage, a savings account, and a job that didn't require steel-toe boots and ammonia. Now at 43, with a Ph.D. in cybersecurity and a back permanently sore from manual labor, Miles Turner was reduced to pushing silence across marble. And somehow, that silence was louder than the applause he used to get at keynote conferences. In the corner near the window, a small figure sat cross-legged on a bench, her head buried in a beat-up sketch pad. Ella, 9 years old, smarter than he ever was, quieter than most ghosts. "Time to pack up, sweetheart," he called softly. She didn't look up. "I need 2 more minutes. I'm almost done with the logic map." Miles wiped the last corner of the floor with unnecessary precision, buying her time. "You know, most kids your age draw ponies, or at least something that doesn't involve matrix compression." Ella shrugged without looking away. "Ponies don't build patterns. Code does." There it was again, that uncanny blend of innocence and razor intellect. She spoke like she was reading from an algorithm. Miles sighed and leaned against his mop like it was a cane holding him up. Maybe it was. He watched her scribble arrows, circles, tiny annotations in code he half understood, and felt the tug in his chest again, not just pride, but fear. Fear that the world wouldn't be gentle with a mind like hers. It hadn't been with his. Why should it be with hers? The elevator dinged. It was nearly midnight. No one ever came down this late unless they were lost or dangerous. The doors opened. She stepped out like she owned the air. Claire Marchand, CEO, tech mogul, worth north of $18 billion according to Forbes. They called her the Queen of Logic, not because she smiled often, but because her code built empires. Her tailored coat was sharper than her stare. Miles froze. Ella didn't. Claire's heels clicked across the marble, echoing like a metronome in the quiet lobby. Her eyes swept over the scene janitor child mop bucket before narrowing slightly. "I forgot my tablet," she said, simply walking past without acknowledging either of them further. Miles nodded once. "Floor's still wet." "I don't slip," she replied without missing a step. Cold, precise, beautiful, dangerous. The kind of person who builds kingdoms with numbers and tears them down with silence. Ella watched her go with quiet curiosity. "She walks like she already knows the outcome of every conversation she hasn't had yet," she whispered. Miles blinked. "What? Never mind." She closed her sketch pad. "I'm done." He held out his hand. "Let's go, genius." They walked through the glass doors into the biting Chicago wind. Snow drifted down like pieces of memory. Miles tugged his jacket tighter around Ella's small frame. She didn't complain. She never did. As they reached the corner, Ella spoke again, her voice soft but certain. "Why do we still come here? You could get another job somewhere else." Miles didn't answer immediately. He looked up at the glittering building they'd just left. "Because this place owes me something," he said quietly. "And I'm not leaving until I figure out what." Ella tilted her head. "Is that revenge?" "No," he replied. That's closure, and I haven't found the loop yet that lets me close it. She nodded once as if she understood more than a 9-year-old ever should. When they reached their apartment, a small but neat 2-bedroom above a convenience store, Ella went straight to her corner desk and opened her sketchpad again. Not to doodle, to build. Miles dropped onto the couch with a groan, pulled off his boots, and glanced at the one photo they kept framed on the mantel. Riley. Her smile still echoed in this place. His late wife, Ella's mother. The reason he got up every morning. He stared at the photo for a long time before whispering, "I'm trying, babe. I'm trying to give her a life you'd be proud of." From her desk, Ella spoke without turning. "Tomorrow, I think I'll bring the new loop design to the library system. I want to test it on their server's backdoor architecture." Miles sat up. "Ella, we've talked about this. No unauthorized network probing. I won't touch anything. Just observe flow. I'm just curious." He rubbed his face. Curiosity built Rome. She finally turned to him. Curiosity also broke your firewall 6 years ago. His stomach dropped. She hadn't meant it cruelly, just as a fact. A line of logic, but the weight of it still hit him like a sledgehammer. The breach that took down his team, the one he'd warned the board about, the one that cost him his company and almost his life. Ella saw his silence. Her face softened. "Sorry, Dad. I didn't mean—" "It's okay," he interrupted, forcing a smile. "You're not wrong. Just, maybe don't remind me how a few missed packets can ruin a man's entire future." She walked over and hugged him. Her arms were small. Her grip was steel. Miles rested his chin on her head. "You'll be better than me." Ella pulled back her eyes, full of quiet certainty. "I already am." It wasn't arrogance, it was truth. And he loved her all the more for saying it without fear. Somewhere above them, the lights of Marchand Global still burned through the snow. What Miles didn't know, what he couldn't yet guess, was that Ella's sketchpad held the first threads of a pattern no one else had seen. Not even Claire Marchand. Not yet, but soon. Very soon. Claire Marchand didn't believe in accidents. She believed in systems, in design, in the ruthless efficiency of clean code and cleaner decisions. So when her tablet wasn't on her desk that morning, she didn't sigh or frown or call an assistant. She simply traced her steps, opened her memory like a mental database, and replayed the night before. Lobby, late, mop water, a janitor, and a girl sitting sketching something. Claire stood in the elevator, now alone as always, descending toward the lobby with that same face the press called ice chiseled. But inside her mind, something flickered. It wasn't the tablet that had her attention. It was the pattern. A single glimpse of that girl's page, a tangle of lines, loops, and sequences scrawled in pencil, had registered like an unsolved equation. Claire hadn't meant to notice, but she had. Her mind was cursed or gifted with hyper-pattern recognition. It didn't ask permission to analyze. It simply did. The elevator opened. The janitor was gone. The bench empty. But Claire crossed the marble floor with intent. There, under the edge of the seat, half-tucked and nearly missed, was a crumpled paper napkin. She didn't hesitate. She picked it up, unfolded it, and paused. It wasn't a doodle. It was a recursive flowchart with nested logic trees. Annotated, sharp, efficient, elegant. Claire blinked once, the only crack in her usually perfect control. The loops weren't just code. They were architecture. She folded the napkin carefully as if it might dissolve under pressure and walked straight back to the elevator. That afternoon, in a small neighborhood library 2 train stops from the loop, Ella Turner sat at a public computer terminal. She wore an oversized hoodie, a pair of cracked headphones, and the quiet composure of someone who knew the world didn't expect much from her and didn't care. The library Wi-Fi was slow. Ella didn't mind. Latency gave her time to think. She wasn't hacking. Not exactly. She was watching, observing packet flow traffic timing and how the firewalls behaved under load. She wasn't breaking in. just listening to how the locks clicked. You don't need to knock on every door to know which ones are hollow, she'd once told her father. Miles had grounded her for a week, but he'd smiled when he did it. Now she was testing a pattern she'd been building, something new, something she couldn't quite explain but could feel. Code had rhythm. Systems had moods. This library's internal structure. It was tired, leaking, predictable. Ella's fingers danced across the keyboard as she wrote notes in her pad. In the margins, she doodled a fox, the same paper fox she used to sell. In her world, foxes didn't trick. They solved. "Excuse me," a voice said behind her. She turned and stared. Claire Marchand did not belong in libraries like this. She belonged on magazine covers and behind double-locked glass. Ella blinked up at her. "You're the woman from last night." Claire nodded. "You dropped this." She held out the napkin. Ella's eyes widened. She took it cautiously. "I didn't mean to litter." Claire ignored that. "Where did you learn to diagram recursive fault tolerance using nested structures?" Ella looked down at her lap. "Nowhere. I just saw it." Claire's tone didn't soften, but something in her stance did. "You saw it. It's like music," Ella said. "If you listen long enough, the wrong notes play louder than the right ones." Claire didn't move, didn't blink. Then, slowly, she sat in the seat beside her. Miles would have had a heart attack. Ella waited. Claire looked at the screen. "What are you running?" "Just packet observation," Ella said. "Nothing invasive." Claire raised an eyebrow. "This network is ancient. That's why it's interesting," Ella said with a tiny smile. Claire studied her like she was debugging something in real time. "How old are you, 9?" Silence. Then Claire said softly, "You don't belong here." Ella straightened. "I know. The janitor's daughter. Wrong clothes, wrong place." But Claire shook her head. "That's not what I meant." She leaned forward, tapping the screen. "You don't belong here. You belong in rooms where people ask the questions you already know how to answer." Ella didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't. Claire stood. "Where's your father?" Ella hesitated. "Working tonight. 3rd shift. Marchand Global." "Figures," Claire said under her breath. "I'll send a car. Be ready by 6 p.m. For what dinner? You'll join me at the lab. There's something I want you to see." Ella looked down at her hoodie. "I don't have anything fancy to wear." Claire paused, then without changing her tone said, "If the code works, no one cares what the computer looks like." She turned heels, echoing across the tile. Ella watched her go, heart thudding in her chest. At 6:01 p.m., Miles stood in the doorway of their apartment, mouth slightly open. She said what that were having dinner in her lab. Miles looked at the town car parked outside the window like it was a mirage. Ella held the door open. "I think you should come too." "Why me?" Ella tilted her head, eyes wide. "Because she might be powerful. But you're smart enough to know what powerful people do when they're afraid of what they don't understand." Miles closed his mouth, then grabbed his coat. The Marchand lab wasn't on any official tour. It was a building behind a building, discreet, windowless, and guarded by 2 biometric scans and a retina check. Inside, the walls pulsed with LED light and the quiet hum of million-dollar servers. Claire led them through with barely a word. Finally, they reached a glass-enclosed room filled with digital displays. Floating on the largest screen was an unsolved loop code, fragmented, recursive, dangerous. A problem no one on Claire's team had cracked. She turned to Ella. "Take a look." Ella stepped forward. Her eyes scanned. Lines connected in her head before they did on the screen. Her voice was soft, but sure. "It's not a security loop. It's a decoy. Someone wants you to think it's broken." Claire's breath caught. Miles watched them both like he was watching lightning strike twice in the same place. Claire turned slowly to him. "Mr. Turner, may I ask what it is you used to do?" He folded his arms. "I built systems to stop people from doing exactly this." Claire nodded, then looked back at Ella. Let's build something better. There are two kinds of silence in tech, Miles said. The kind that means everything's fine, and the kind that means someone's hiding a bomb. Claire didn't blink. She stood beside the digital whiteboard, arms crossed, as Ella traced loops and nodes faster than most senior engineers could follow. They were 3 hours into their informal dinner at the Marchand lab, and not a single bite of food had been served. Not that anyone had noticed. Miles was still trying to figure out how the most powerful woman in Chicago had decided to let his daughter take the lead on her company's biggest internal mystery. Scratch that not decided. Trusted. Here, Ella said, pointing to a subroutine near the end of the recursive loop. This isn't failure logic, it's delay logic. Claire stepped closer. Her eyes scanned the same line of code. Intentional throttling. That would explain the data bleed we've been seeing in peripheral systems. But no signature. Ella nodded. That's the smart part. Whoever did this used ghost variables names that don't exist in the compiled logs but still execute commands. They disappear the second the function ends. Claire let out a breath that sounded almost like awe. You're 9. Ella looked up, her face calm. Code doesn't care how old you are. Miles smiled faintly. That was Riley's phrase. Ella had never known her mother beyond memory, but somehow her spirit surfaced through words like that. Claire turned to him. Your daughter could have found this in any system she walked into. I know, Miles said. That's why I've taught her to be careful where she walks. Claire looked at him longer than necessary, then said quietly, She's brilliant, but she's also exposed now. Miles straightened. What do you mean? Claire walked over to a second screen and tapped open a window of internal reports. 6 months ago, we noticed fluctuations in our secondary asset pools. Nothing that raised alarms, just small inconsistencies. Then came the server bugs. Recursive loops that looked like legacy errors. And Miles pressed. And last week we traced one of those loops back to a financial algorithm that we don't recognize. It doesn't belong to any of our coders. No one on payroll admits to writing it. Ella's brow furrowed. That loop we saw, was it connected to the finance database? Claire gave her a look that held both admiration and concern. Yes, deep layer access, buried under triple encryption. Only reason we even found it was because one of our junior analysts triggered an anomaly alert by accident. Miles stepped forward, voice low. You're saying someone inside your company has planted a shell algorithm in your financial architecture, and you still don't know why? Claire nodded. Not yet. But I have a feeling we just met the only person who can see what everyone else missed. Ella looked up at her dad. It's a decoy, she said again, and it's hiding something worse. Claire spoke softly now, as if afraid to say it aloud. The question is what? Back at their apartment later that night, Miles sat on the couch, elbows on knees, hands steepled in front of his face. Ella was brushing her teeth, humming faintly, as if she hadn't just spent the evening casually exposing security holes in a multi-billion-dollar tech company. Claire had offered them a consulting contract on the spot. Full access, no red tape, no NDA. Miles had said he needed time to think, but he already knew what terrified him. They weren't playing with puzzles anymore. They were opening doors meant to stay closed. Ella walked in wearing her old hoodie, drying her hands on the sleeves. She's not like I expected, she said. Ella nodded. She's not cold. She's careful, like someone who got hurt a long time ago and decided never to bleed again. Miles stared at her, caught off guard. You picked that up in one meeting. Ella shrugged. People leave data trails. You just have to listen differently. He reached out, pulled her in. She sat beside him. This could get dangerous, he said. Real danger. Not just bugs and crashes, the kind where people don't want to be found out. I know. I don't want you in that world. I'm already in it, Dad. The words hit him in the chest. She wasn't wrong. But hearing it like that felt like losing her to something he couldn't protect her from. You're still a kid, Elle. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. I'm your kid. That's how I know I'll be okay." They sat in silence. The only sound was the low hum of the city outside, sirens in the distance, wind scraping against the window. Then Miles spoke. "I used to think building firewalls was the highest form of defense. Now I realize real protection isn't code." Ella looked up. "What is it then?" He smiled sadly. "It's staying close to the people who matter before the world pulls them apart." The next morning, Claire sent a car. Again. This time, Miles went with Ella. Marchand Lab had cleared out a corner office, glass walls, 2 desks, one tall, one child-sized, both with full system access. Claire stood there as they arrived, arms behind her back. "This will be your space," she said. Miles looked around. "You're serious about this?" Claire nodded. "If there's something buried in my company, I want it out. And if I have to rely on a janitor and his daughter to do that, so be it." He raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to be a compliment. It's supposed to be a reckoning." Ella stepped forward, setting her sketchpad down on the desk. "We should start with the asset transaction logs from the 3rd quarter. That's where the pattern phrase." Claire blinked. "You already analyzed them." "Not all of it," Ella said. "Just enough to see that something's moving money, without moving money." Claire's eyes widened. Miles stepped beside his daughter, jaw tightening. "Looks like someone's building a ghost pipeline." Claire met his gaze. "Then we break it." She turned and for the first time offered her hand. "Miles. Ella. Welcome to the war room." Ella shook it first. Miles followed, gripping it firmly. 3 unlikely allies. 1 buried truth. And a loop no one had closed until now. You ever look at code so long it starts talking back? Miles stared at the glowing wall of numbers projected onto the lab's glass panel. Claire stood behind him, arms crossed, black coffee in hand. "No. But I've looked at people so long, they started lying prettier." Ella didn't laugh. She was already at the whiteboard, drawing loops by hand, muttering softly under her breath like the equations were verses in a song. 3 days into their unofficial partnership, the rhythm was starting to form. Claire had turned over access to archived system logs, encrypted records even her own CTO hadn't seen in years. Ella was parsing them faster than the AI. The deeper they dove, the clearer it became someone had threaded a hidden logic structure through Marchand Global's financial core. Not just theft, not just sabotage, something subtler, more dangerous. "Patterns shifting," Ella said. "Like it's adapting. Every time we isolate a pathway, another forks." Claire leaned over her shoulder. "Like a hydra." "Or a mirror," Miles added. "It's not just multiplying, it's reflecting us." Ella turned eyes wide. "What if that's the point?" Claire blinked. "Explain." Ella walked to the center of the room and tapped on the data feed. "This isn't about stealing money. It's about hiding the act of stealing inside a structure that looks exactly like standard company operations." Miles nodded slowly. "Someone's running shadow protocols in tandem with real ones. That's why nothing flagged. Every illegal action is mirrored by a legitimate one." Claire exhaled. "A fraud camouflage. That's terrifyingly elegant." Ella bit her lip. "It's also something I can trace, but I'll need raw access. Legacy servers. Unfiltered." Claire hesitated. "Those servers aren't even on our cloud anymore. They're archived in cold storage." "I don't need live code," Ella said. "I need history." Claire tapped her thumb against her mug, thinking. "I can pull the backups, but it'll raise questions." "Then give me a cover," Miles said. Claire turned. "I still have my old certifications," he continued. "Spin it like you're running a retroactive breach audit. I'm the outside consultant reviewing legacy systems." Claire arched a brow. "You offering to be my misdirection? I'm offering to protect my daughter," he said simply. Claire studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I'll authorize the access tonight." Later that evening, as the sky over Chicago turned burnt orange and glass towers blinked to life, Miles found himself alone with Claire in the elevator. They hadn't spoken since the briefing. The silence between them wasn't awkward, but it was loaded. He broke it first. "You always this trusting with people who walk in from the service entrance." Claire glanced at him. "I'm not trusting. I'm selective." He chuckled. "That a compliment? That's a warning." Miles looked at her more carefully now. "You ever wonder why someone like you would let someone like me into a lab like that?" She didn't respond, because somewhere in you he continued, "You're hoping we're wrong." Her jaw clenched. "You're hoping there isn't a monster in your system. That maybe it's all just noise. Some bad data stringed together." Claire's voice was tight. "I don't have the luxury of hoping." "You did once," Miles said, "before the press called you the Ice Queen." That made her turn. "Don't pretend you know me." "I don't," he said gently. "But I know the look of someone who trusted the wrong person once and decided never to repeat the experiment." Claire's eyes didn't soften, but she didn't look away either. "You think I'm cold. I think you're guarded. There's a difference." She turned away as the elevator dinged. "We should get to work." But something in her steps had changed. The way she moved wasn't armor anymore. It was hesitation. Meanwhile, Ella sat curled up in the lab's side-room blanket over her lap, headphones half on. She wasn't watching cartoons. She was reading a thesis on quantum signature collision one she'd found by accident while tracing old crypto logs. Claire stepped in quietly. "Need anything?" Ella didn't look up. "No, thank you." Claire lingered, then asked, "Do you ever miss being a kid?" Ella paused. "I don't think I ever was one." Claire's breath caught. "Mom died when I was 3, Ella said simply. "After that, it was just me and Dad." And silence. He didn't talk about her much, but the silence. It was full of her. Claire sat down beside her. "Do you want to talk about her now?" Ella looked up. For the first time, there was a flicker of vulnerability. "She used to sing," she said. "I don't remember the songs, just the feeling. Like the world was holding its breath so her voice could finish the note." Claire nodded, her own voice soft. "That's how I felt about my father. When he coded, it was like watching someone write music with numbers." "Is that why you started building things?" Claire hesitated. "I started building because I hated how powerless I felt when he died. No one listened to the grieving daughter of a systems engineer, but they listened to the girl who could outcode her professors." Ella smiled faintly. "So you became a fortress." Claire looked down. "Something like that." They sat in silence. Then Claire whispered, "You're not like other children, Ella." Ella looked at her. "That's what they always say before they ask me to act more like one." Claire shook her head. "I'm not asking that. I'm just saying what you see. The pattern's the logic. It's rare, and it's precious, and I will not let this world crush it because it doesn't know how to categorize you." Ella blinked. "Is that a promise?" Claire reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face. "That's a contract." Ella smiled. It was small, but it was real. In the hallway, Miles watched them through the glass. He didn't interrupt, just watched. The woman he once thought of as untouchable was now sitting cross-legged beside his daughter, sharing memories, making her laugh. And in that moment, something shifted in him. Not distrust, not skepticism, but permission. Permission to believe that maybe, just maybe, they weren't alone in this. Not anymore. It's not just what they're hiding. It's how they're hiding it. Ella's voice was calm, but her eyes burned like she'd found a loose thread in a tapestry and was ready to pull. She stood before the main screen in the Marchand lab, her finger hovering over a cluster of symbols. Claire and Miles flanked her, both silent, both visibly absorbing the implications. What she had just shown them didn't look like much a few irregular lines in a sea of code. But to Ella, they weren't lines. They were fingerprints. "There's a hidden ledger," she said, circling 3 time-stamped fragments. Not in the actual finance servers, in the echo logs of the code commits. Someone mirrored the changes in a cloaked sub-environment. It's invisible unless you know how to track execution shadows. Claire stared. Even I never saw this. Ella turned to her. That's because it wasn't meant for your eyes. It was meant for no one's. Miles crossed his arms, jaw tense. You're saying someone's running 2 accounting systems inside your infrastructure. Ella nodded. One for the board, one for the shadows. Claire leaned forward. How deep does it go? I don't know yet, Ella said. But I do know one thing. She tapped the screen again. This isn't sloppy work. This is surgical. Hours later, the lab was dim, lit only by screen glow and the humming pulse of data streams. Miles sat on the edge of the couch, turning a USB drive between his fingers. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at the tiny object that could now implicate billions. Claire stood by the window sipping cold coffee, her gaze distant but sharp. She's just a child, Miles finally said. No, Claire replied. She's a miracle in sneakers. Miles let out a breath, half laughter, half exhaustion. She's also my daughter. And this is dangerous ground. Claire looked at him, really looked. You're scared she's walking too close to fire? No, he said. I'm scared she's the one holding the match. Silence. Then Claire sat beside him, not close but not distant either. I was 12 when I wrote my first encryption sequence, she said. 15 when I broke my first government firewall on accident, by the way. My mother thought I was applying for a summer camp. Miles smirked. Let me guess. It wasn't Campfire Girls. Claire's lips curled. It was a DARPA honeypot. They both chuckled. The laughter was short but genuine. Then Claire sobered. I know what it's like to be the only one in the room who sees the flaw, and the temptation to prove it, even if it means standing alone. Miles looked down at the USB again. She's not alone. Claire's voice softened. No, not anymore. In the adjacent room, Ella sat curled in her chair blanket around her legs, headphones resting on her neck. Her sketch pad lay open pages filled with looping structures and shorthand notations. But tonight she wasn't coding. She was staring at the wall. Claire entered quietly. You stopped drawing. Ella blinked. My brain's full. The ideas need time to settle. Claire sat beside her. That's how you know they're real. The best ideas come back to you, even when you try to forget them. Ella didn't smile. Claire waited. Then, almost in a whisper, Ella said, I saw something. Claire's posture shifted. What kind of something? Ella held out a page handwritten messy raw. It's a routing pattern, a signal chain that doesn't belong to our systems. It's old, hidden inside one of the maintenance updates, almost like a piggyback. Claire's eyes narrowed, piggybacked how Ella pointed. It pings a private server, not marchand, not even domestic. Claire felt the cold drop into her spine. Where is it? Ella looked up. Zurich. Unregistered shell domain. It started after Q2 when your CTO took his sabbatical. Claire's face went blank. Then she stood. Pack your things. Now. 30 minutes later, in a quiet safe house Claire had arranged for emergencies, a brownstone just outside Logan Square Miles paced the floor as Claire double-checked the encrypted line from her laptop. This wasn't just fraud, she said. This was a full-scale siphoning operation. Whoever did this used our legacy systems as a tunnel moving funds through false trade orders, laundering through fake vendors, and redirecting into offshore cycles. Miles stared. How long? 18 months. Maybe longer. And how much? Claire hesitated. Ella answered first. Projected estimate, 4.7 billion. Miles sat down slowly like his legs had stopped working. Jesus. Ella walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. It wasn't your fault, Dad. Claire joined them. No, it was mine. I built the company. I trusted the wrong architects. Not just architects, Miles muttered. They buried it in your DNA. Claire looked at Ella. "And you found it." Ella's voice was steady, because I knew what to listen for. Claire knelt down to her level. "I need you to understand something, Ella. What you found, people have killed to keep hidden." Miles stood, voice rising, "Which is why we walk away now." But Ella stepped back. "I can't," she said. Miles froze. "Ella." She looked him in the eyes, tears not yet formed but close. "You told me once," she whispered, "that we don't walk away from people who can't defend themselves. That silence isn't always safe." Miles's heart cracked wide open. That was different. "No," Ella said. "It was the same. You fought systems once. This is my fight now. You raised me to see the patterns. Don't ask me to unsee them." Claire stayed silent. Miles turned away, struggling. Then Ella crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. He held her back like she was the only thing keeping him upright. Claire finally spoke. "Then we do this together. But on our terms." Miles looked at her. "What does that mean?" She stood tall. "It means we stop running. We start documenting. Quietly, thoroughly, and when the time comes, we don't just expose them. We make sure they never get to rewrite the code again." Back at Marchand Global, in a dark corner of the executive floor, a notification blinked silently on a private terminal. A ghost protocol had been triggered. Someone had accessed the dormant data chain. A man in a designer's suit watched the screen. His lips curled. "They found it," he murmured. Finally. He reached for his phone. "It's time. Move the next phase up. Trust isn't something you earn once. It's something you prove in the middle of the fire." Miles whispered the words as he tightened the straps on Ella's backpack, checking for the emergency burner phone ID copies and backup flash drive. He didn't look up, but he felt Claire's eyes on him from across the safe-house kitchen. She was sipping tea like it was a war strategy, because it was. Ella sat quietly at the table reading code like a child reads bedtime stories, eyes wide, lips slightly parted, pencil in hand. But this time the page she worked on wasn't a sketchpad. It was the start of a counter-algorithm. "You think we have days," Claire said. "We have hours, maybe less." Miles finally looked at her. "So what do you suggest that we throw a press conference, blast this across the internet?" Claire shook her head. "No, we do what they don't expect." She walked over and tapped the table beside Ella. "We go back in. One more time. We find the core access point, the true origin of the shell structure. That's where the kill switch is." Ella looked up, and if they catch us, Claire answered without hesitation, then they know we're not afraid anymore. They returned to Marchand Global under cover of darkness, each with their own clearance and cover story. Claire CEO conducting a late-night audit after internal anomalies. Miles, outside consultant, reinstated to test legacy security. Ella, too young to have a title, but smarter than the entire cybersecurity division. They moved, quickly entering through the side entrance of the building and descending into the sub-level archive servers, a cold vault of blinking blue lights and humming fans. "This is where your company buries its bones," Miles said. Claire glanced sideways, "and sometimes it's truth." Ella didn't speak. She was already at the terminal. Within seconds, her fingers were flying. The screen lit with cascading data streams, access chains, encrypted logs. Miles stood behind her, tension in every muscle. "You okay?" She nodded. "It's like hearing a language. I forgot I spoke." Claire leaned in. "Tell me what you see." "There's a time-locked command structure," Ella said. "Every 6 days it repings a dummy vendor to reauthorize internal asset flow. But that vendor doesn't exist." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Blackwood." Miles turned. "Victor Blackwood." "He's still on your board. Silent partner," she said. "But now I know where the silence ends." Ella tapped a few keys, zooming in on a side structure. "Dad, look." Miles squinted. What he saw turned his blood to ice. It wasn't just payments. It was employee IDs, password resets, Vendor chain overrides. They weren't siphoning money. They were building a back door into entire departments. Claire leaned forward, voice cold. They could trigger a complete collapse. In one day. Ella looked up. Unless we beat them to it. Miles exhaled. We need to extract everything. Now. Claire handed him a secure drive. Take it to Sarah. She can mirror the logs off-site. You're splitting us up, Miles asked. Claire nodded. Ella stays with me. She knows the architecture. I'll keep her safe. Ella reached for her father's hand. You'll come back. He squeezed it gently. Always. Then he turned, looked Claire in the eye. If anything happens to her, Claire cut him off. It won't. I've buried more dangerous men for less. After Miles left, the lab fell into a quiet hum. Ella returned to the terminal, eyes sharp. Claire sat beside her, not in command, but in protection. You're not what I expected, Ella said suddenly. Claire blinked. I get that a lot. No. I mean, Ella turned to her. You're not cold. You're hurt. But you still chose to care. Claire looked at her, and for once no mask remained. I stopped trusting people after my father died. I learned it's easier to survive alone than to be betrayed surrounded. Ella nodded. My mom died when I was 3. After that, my dad did everything. But sometimes, I think he stopped living and just focused on keeping me alive. Claire's voice trembled. It's easy to forget you deserve more than survival. Ella looked at her. Are you saying that to me? Or yourself? Claire didn't answer. But she reached over, brushed a strand of hair behind Ella's ear. You remind me of who I was supposed to become. At 3:12 a.m., the first warning hit the screen. Unauthorized system ping detected. Claire stood instantly. They're watching the Legacy channel. Ella's fingers danced. I can reroute. No, wait. They're not just watching. They're coming. Physical breach warning. Internal badge clearance override. 14th floor. Claire grabbed her phone. Text from Miles. They followed me. We've been made. Go dark. Ella stood. We can't shut down the server. If we do, they'll wipe the chain. Claire scanned the room. We initiate Protocol 7. Safe house separation. Ella's voice was tight. But that means we split up. Claire turned to her, eyes fierce. Do you trust me? Ella didn't hesitate. Yes. Claire pulled open a side panel in the server wall, revealing a maintenance shaft. You take the storage copy. Head 2 floors down and exit through the janitor's corridor. Sarah will meet you behind the east wing. And you? Ella asked. Claire smiled. Not cold, not sharp, just tired and alive. I'm going to have a conversation with the people who thought they still owned me. Ella hugged her tight, no hesitation. Claire whispered, Keep changing the code, little fox. Ella whispered back, You too, Ice Queen. Then she disappeared into the shadows. Upstairs, the elevator doors opened. Victor Blackwood walked in with the calm of someone who already owned the ending. But Claire was waiting back, straight eyes ablaze. You underestimated the janitor, she said. Blackwood tilted his head. No, I underestimated the child. Claire stepped forward. Big mistake. Behind her, the server lights blinked red evidence disappearing into a fox-shaped algorithm already miles away. The silence in the safe house wasn't peace. It was pressure. Sarah Lawson stood at the counter watching the encrypted laptop refresh line after line of mirrored logs. Ella sat cross-legged on the floor beside it, surrounded by printed files and sketch pads, her hair still damp from the rain, her hoodie clinging to her arms. She looked like a child, but she worked like a war strategist. Miles burst through the door 5 minutes later, soaked and breathless. He froze when he saw Ella. Her face lit up in relief. You made it. I followed 3 decoys and still barely lost them, Miles said, voice hoarse. Are you okay? Ella nodded, running to him. He wrapped his arms around her, holding on longer than usual. Sarah cleared her throat. "We're not safe here anymore. I traced 2 surveillance drones hovering within a 4-block radius. We trigger the relocation protocol," Miles said. "Now." "But we're not done," Ella interrupted. "There's more inside that system." "We have enough," Sarah argued. 3 years of record shell accounts, fake vendors' asset flows. It's more than enough for the feds. Ella looked between them. "No, it isn't." "Why not?" Miles asked. "Because it's not just about catching what they did." Her voice cracked slightly. "It's about building something that makes sure no one can do it again." Miles frowned. "Ella." But Sarah held up a hand. "Wait, let her talk." Ella walked to the whiteboard and picked up a marker with the confidence of someone twice her age. "I've been running something in the background. A pattern-scanning algorithm. It started as a tracker. Now it's evolved." She wrote a line of code. "What you're looking at," she said, "isn't just a detection system. It's a predictive model one that can identify the early signs of coordinated financial fraud across multiple networks. In real time." Sarah blinked. "Like a firewall, but for systemic corruption." Ella nodded. "It reads the fingerprints of deception before the crime completes." Miles stared at the board, then at his daughter. "You built this while running for your life." Ella looked up at him, eyes clear. "Some people run. Some people build what others run to." By the time dawn painted Chicago in tired grays and hopeful golds, the trio had moved to a second safe house, this one above a family-run bookstore, quiet and untraceable. Claire arrived at 6:14 a.m. Eyes red-rimmed suit, wrinkled but standing tall. "You're live," Miles said, exhaling in visible relief. "Barely," she replied, removing her heels. "Blackwood knows everything." Ella looked up from the terminal. "Then we're out of time." Claire walked to her, kneeling beside the computer like a general consulting her chief engineer. "What are we looking at?" Ella pulled up the interface. "A live heat map. Each red spike is a confirmed fraudulent cluster. Yellow ones are probable. I can scale it globally. I just need more processing power." Claire turned to Sarah. "How much do you need?" Sarah glanced at the specs. A distributed cloud environment, 3 secure relays, and a sandbox protocol to shield the source code. Claire stood. "Done." Miles stepped forward. "You're really going to put your name behind this?" Claire didn't flinch. "I'm not putting my name behind it. I'm putting it beneath it. This isn't about my reputation anymore. It's about what we owe the world we helped build." That afternoon, a secure data stream was sent to the Securities and Exchange Commission attached to an anonymous tip. Minutes later, a mirrored packet went to the DOJ, followed by encrypted deliveries to 4 major financial watchdog groups and 3 respected journalists. Within 90 minutes, the algorithm had triggered alerts in 2 international banking institutions, 1 hedge fund under federal scrutiny, and a government contract flagged for irregularities. Ella's model wasn't just working, it was singing. But the system doesn't lose gracefully. At 2:46 p.m., their terminal was hit by a denial-of-service attack, massive, coordinated, and brutal. Sarah pivoted fast, rerouting through private nodes. Ella kept coding. Claire made calls to every cloud server she had equity in. Miles stood by the door, hand resting on the handle of the emergency go bag. "We hold," Claire said. The windows shook slightly. Still holding, Sarah muttered. Ella's fingers didn't pause. Then, silence. The attack collapsed. The terminal stabilized. Sarah grinned. They tripped their own kill switch. We weren't the target. They were trying to burn the house down before we could show the world what was inside it. Ella leaned back, exhausted but calm. They failed. That night, they didn't work. They ate dinner together. Real dinner. On the floor, takeout boxes, bad chopsticks, laughter between bites. It wasn't celebration, it was something gentler. It was the sound of people remembering they were human. Claire raised her glass. To little foxes. Ella raised hers. to firewalls that think. Sarah lifted hers, to janitors who don't stay on the floor. They clinked paper cups. Miles watched them all, then looked at his daughter, her face flushed with effort lit from within. He said quietly, more to himself than anyone else, "I thought I was saving her. But maybe she was always meant to save something bigger than both of us." Ella looked at him. "You did save me." He blinked. "You saved me," she said again, "by seeing me. The rest, I learned from watching you never give up." He didn't answer. He just reached out and pulled her close. Claire turned away to give them privacy, but not before wiping something from her eye. Across the city, Victor Blackwood stood in a private boardroom with 5 powerful men. Screens blinked with chaos. His phone buzzed. He looked down. One message. The child built a mirror, and now the world is looking. Blackwood's hands clenched into fists. This isn't over. But for the first time in his life, he sounded like a man who wasn't sure he believed it. The sky over Chicago looked softer that morning, as if the city itself had taken a breath. But inside the modest safe house above the bookstore, the room pulsed with urgency. Claire stood beside the window, her eyes locked on a tablet streaming the latest headlines. Anonymous algorithm triggers global financial flags. Insiders claim Marchand Global uncovers internal fraud. Unconfirmed reports suggest child prodigy involved in massive discovery. She set the tablet down. "They know," she said flatly. Miles nodded, arms crossed. Then it started. Sarah paced near the server terminal. "We're seeing spikes in interest from every major institution. Half the hedge funds on the East Coast are scanning the released code fragments, and 3 watchdog agencies just reached out for private collaboration." Ella didn't react. She was at the whiteboard again, drawing a new structure. Claire walked over. "What's that?" Ella didn't stop sketching. "A refinement." Claire leaned in. "It's not enough to identify the fraud," Ella said softly. "We have to understand what makes it invisible in the first place." She stepped back, revealing a new series of layered loops. It's not just about code. It's about behavior, timing, assumptions. Most systems are built assuming users are honest. That's the flaw. Sarah's brow lifted. "You're rewriting the logic of trust itself." Ella nodded. Miles walked over and rested his hand gently on her shoulder. "What do you call it?" Ella looked up. "The Loop Protocol." Claire whispered it under her breath. "It's perfect." They held a remote strategy call that afternoon with legal advisors, 3 independent economists, and 2 whistleblower organizations. James Ellis, a former federal investigator, stared at the data on his screen, his jaw slack. "This isn't just revolutionary," he said. "It's insurance against future collapse." Miles leaned in. "So, you believe it'll hold up in court?" Ellis nodded. "With the logs, the source architecture, and this algorithm, we're not just showing what Blackwood did, we're proving how he built the vault and the tunnel inside it." "Good," Claire said. "Because we're not accepting settlements. We go all the way." One of the other advisors, a seasoned woman named Evelyn Park, narrowed her eyes. "That kind of moral high ground usually comes with a steep fall." Claire didn't flinch. "Then we learn how to land on our feet." That evening, as the others rested, Ella and Miles sat on the rooftop patio under a pale pink sky. He handed her a mug of warm cocoa and settled beside her. "I keep waiting to wake up," he said. "Waiting for the moment someone tells me this was all a dream." Ella sipped slowly, the steam clouding her glasses. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Which part?" "Letting me do this. Letting me fight back." He turned to her, studying her small frame against the city skyline. "I used to think my job was to protect you from the world," he said quietly. "But now I think maybe my real job was to walk beside you while you protected part of it." Ella blinked. "That's a lot to put on a kid." Miles smiled. "Then I guess it's lucky you're not just a kid." They sat in silence for a while. Then Ella whispered, "I still get scared." Miles turned. Of what? Of being too different. Of always being the smartest person in the room. And still not being heard. He leaned in and touched her chin gently. "Then find better rooms. And if you can't find them, build them. And fill them with people who hear you not just because you're smart, but because they care." Ella's voice was small. Like Claire Miles nodded slowly. Like Claire. Inside, Claire stood in the hallway having heard every word. She didn't enter. She just stood there, one hand against the wall, heart full of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. By the next morning, the first lawsuit was filed. A civil suit against Victor Blackwood and two unnamed partners backed by a coalition of investors who had reviewed the Loop protocol and now wanted justice. The media scrambled for details. Headlines grew bolder. Leaks began pouring in from terrified insiders. And then it happened. A quiet ping on the Marchand system. A forgotten access credential used from an offshore server. Sarah caught it immediately. "It's Blackwood. He's trying to wipe the old logs." Miles jumped to his feet. "Can he do it?" "Not anymore," Ella said, stepping up. "I set a failsafe. Every time someone tries to delete the old logs, they get sent to 10 new places." Claire smirked. "We turned his game into a trap." Sarah laughed. "We didn't just expose him. We made the code fight back." That night, as the world spun under their feet, Ella presented her final update to the Loop protocol. Claire Miles and Sarah watched as she pulled up the last module, a logic pattern that didn't just detect fraud. It taught the system to learn from it, to evolve. Claire stared at the screen, barely breathing. "This doesn't just fix what's broken," she whispered. "It builds a future that resists breaking." Ella didn't speak. Claire turned to her, her voice barely audible. "Do you realize what you've done?" Ella looked up. "Not yet," she said. "But I think we just gave the world a reason to trust again." Miles exhaled slowly. And all because a little girl once sold paper foxes in the rain. Claire walked over, knelt beside her, and looked her in the eyes. "You didn't just change the system, Ella. You reminded us it was worth saving." Ella blinked fast. Her lips quivered. Then she leaned forward. And, for the first time, she hugged Claire, tightly. Across the city, Victor Blackwood stood on a rooftop penthouse watching as his empire flickered in and out of media feeds like a vanishing pulse. His phone buzzed. One word. "It's over." He threw the phone. But even before it shattered, he knew. They'd closed the loop. And this time, they weren't alone. "You're sure about this?" Miles asked, standing at the threshold of the boardroom. Claire adjusted the cuffs of her navy blazer and looked at him, calm but burning. "I'm not asking for permission." He smiled faintly. "Didn't think you were." Inside, the Marchand Global Executive Boardroom gleamed with clinical perfection polished walnut table, 12 high-backed chairs, frosted glass walls. And behind it all, a 30-foot digital wall displaying global metrics, shifting charts, and live ticker streams. But today, it wasn't numbers they would be watching. It was truth. Claire stepped in first, every click of her heels echoing like a gavel. Behind her, Miles in a simple suit that barely concealed the calluses on his hands. And Ella, no suit, no nameplate, no uniform. Just a backpack slung over one shoulder and a laptop clutched to her chest like a compass she'd carved herself. The room went still. 12 executives, half confused, half tense. One chair empty. Victor Blackwood's. Claire moved straight to the head of the table and placed her phone down, activating the mirrored live stream. Government officials, regulators, and 3 journalists were silently patched in. She took a breath. This is not a regular board meeting. Clearly, someone scoffed. Claire ignored it. This is a reckoning. For all of us. One man leaned forward. "You're overstepping, Claire. You don't have the votes. I don't need votes," she cut in. "I have proof, and I have witnesses." She turned to Ella. "Begin." Ella stepped up, plugged in her laptop, and opened the interface. At first, only silence, a blank screen. Then the room came alive with cascading data flow charts, IP logs, transaction tags, and then voice samples. Recordings. Blackwood's voice unmistakable. We build the shell. Feed it just enough real data to keep auditors quiet. Let the rest ride the loophole. No one's watching. The air went cold. The color drained from several faces. Ella's voice was calm but piercing. This system, your system, was bleeding from the inside out, and every one of you either looked away or looked too late. One woman stood. We didn't know. Claire's reply was swift. You didn't ask. Ella pulled up another diagram. This is the loop protocol. It doesn't just find the holes. It learns how they're made, and now it's watching every single transaction you ever tried to bury. A man slammed his hand on the table. This is a stunt. You can't shame us into Claire's voice sliced through the room. No, I'm not shaming you. I'm offering you a choice. She looked around the table. We rebuild. Not just the books, but the soul of this company. We sign over full access to every regulator, every compliance officer. We adopt this protocol as our new standard. Someone whispered, "You're burning it all down." "No," Claire said. "I'm planting something better in the ashes." Later, in a smaller room, no cameras, no titles. Miles sat across from Claire as Ella quietly played with a stress ball in the corner. "You were incredible in there," Miles said. Claire stared out the window for a long moment before responding. "No, I was accountable." He tilted his head. "Same thing, sometimes." She turned to him, eyes softening. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just a janitor who stuck his nose where it didn't belong." He chuckled. "I kind of was. But now," she took a breath, "I realize you weren't trying to break into something. You were trying to hold something together, something I'd already let slip." Miles leaned forward. "Redemption doesn't always look like a grand gesture, Claire. Sometimes it looks like mopping a hallway no one else sees." She smiled. "And sometimes it looks like trusting someone when it's easier not to." A silence passed. Then Claire asked, "Do you think they'll forgive me?" "The public, the employees, myself." Miles looked at her long and hard. "I don't know about all of them," he said quietly, "but I know one person already has." He turned toward Ella. She looked up, gave Claire a small smile, and said, "You showed up when it mattered. That's what real people do." Claire blinked fast, her voice almost cracking. "Thank you." That night, Ella sat alone in the same boardroom, the one that had felt like a fortress. Now it felt different. Claire entered softly and placed something beside her. It was a nameplate. Not engraved, just paper. But the words hit like thunder. Ella Dawson Systems, Integrity Architect. Ella stared. "I thought you didn't like titles," she whispered. "I don't," Claire said, "but you earned this one." Ella looked up. "You're not giving me a seat at the table, are you?" "No," Claire said with a half-smile. "I'm letting you redesign the table." Outside, the city pulsed. In the office above it all, a young girl in a hoodie and a woman who once ruled through silence stood side by side, no longer architect and executive janitor and genius, but people. People who chose to close a loop that no one else had dared to see, and in doing so opened a door the world would never close again. 6 weeks later. Ethan pushed open the door to the fourth-floor learning lab, once a dull, unused storage space now reborn as something new. No plaques, no dress code, just a simple wooden sign on the wall that read, "Innovation Hub." The room buzzed with quiet life. Half tech lab, half community library, a whiteboard full of strange algorithms, cardboard boxes stacked with donated laptops, plants in coffee tins, a shelf full of books on ethics, systems theory, and bedtime stories. Lucy sat cross-legged on the floor in the reading nook, her nose buried in a French dictionary. A hand-drawn poster beside her read, "Say it. Mean it. Then do it twice as well." Ethan smiled and set down a box of new routers. Before he could even say a word, Claire's voice floated in from the corner. Don't call it redemption, she said, standing at the window with 2 mugs of coffee. Call it repair. Ethan looked at her a little older now, not in years, but in gravity. He stepped over. "You're early," he said. She shrugged. "You're still a janitor at heart. I didn't want to be late." He chuckled softly. "I still wipe counters when no one's looking. That's why I trust you." He took the mug, leaned against the wall beside her. For a moment, the world outside the window felt a little slower. "You know," he said, "this place. It shouldn't exist." Claire nodded. "That's why it had to." She looked around. "This room doesn't care about resumes. It doesn't check who you used to be. It only asks one thing. What are you willing to build next?" Ethan looked over at Lucy, who was now helping another kid with pronunciation. "She's been sleeping better," he said. "She's safer," Claire replied. "No cameras, no silence in her own house, no pretending she's not brilliant." Claire tilted her head. "And you, Ethan, thought for a long moment. I'm still learning how to live without fear." Claire didn't press. She just let that truth hang in the air like incense. Then she asked, "Do you regret not taking the settlement?" He shook his head immediately. "No. Regret's easy. Living with truth is harder, but it's cleaner." He sipped his coffee, then added, "You know, for a long time I thought being the janitor meant I was invisible, disposable, replaceable. You weren't. I know that now," he said. "But back then it felt like I was always one step behind the world." Claire placed her mug down and looked at him with a quiet kind of tenderness. "You were never behind. You were underneath it, holding it up." Later that afternoon, they gathered in the small open hall that doubled as a community classroom. Kids, teens, a few ex-staff from Marchand, 2 retired professors, and a handful of single parents. No uniforms, no hierarchy. Just a whiteboard that said, "Today's topic, truth systems. How to build things that don't lie." Ella stood at the front. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a blue hoodie that still had a tear in the sleeve from the night of the data leak. Her voice was calm. "When I was little," she said, "I thought smart meant finishing first. Being right, solving puzzles no one else could." She paused. "But now I think smart means knowing when you don't know, and asking better questions." Someone raised their hand. "Do you think the loop protocol will change the world?" Ella smiled gently. "I don't think code changes the world. People do, but only when they decide to stop hiding." From the back of the room, Ethan watched her, his daughter. No longer running, no longer shrinking, just being. Claire leaned over to him and whispered, "How did you raise someone like her?" Ethan replied, barely audible. "I didn't raise her. I just made sure she had room to become who she already was." Claire's eyes watered, and she nodded. That evening, as the sun bled soft orange across the skyline, Ella stood alone in the hub beside the window, looking down at the sidewalk where people passed without noticing the miracle above them. Ethan walked in silent, as ever, holding a small box. "I found something," he said. She turned. Inside the box was a folded paper fox, worn, crumpled, but unmistakably hers. Ella stared. "I kept it," Ethan said, "even when I couldn't afford dinner, even when we didn't have a couch. That little fox reminded me," she finished for him, "that there's still beauty in things no one understands yet." He nodded, then stepped forward and placed it on the shelf beside the books and plants. It wasn't framed. It didn't need to be. Then she asked, "Do you ever miss who we were before all this?" Ethan thought about it. "I miss not being afraid," he said, "but I don't miss being small." Ella looked at him, tears at the edge of her lashes. "Are we done running?" He pulled her into a hug. "We're not running," he whispered. "We're standing." Finally. The next morning, a new sign appeared on the front door, hand-painted and nailed in by Ethan himself. "Welcome. Leave your title at the door. Bring your integrity inside. 6 months later." Gabriel stepped into the Marchand Global Conference Room, a modest briefcase in one hand and his daughter's pink lunchbox in the other. He wore a plain gray suit, pressed but unassuming, no designer labels, no cufflinks. Just a man with work to do and a child waiting for him afterward. The glass door bore a new inscription: Gabriel Cole, Strategic Culture Liaison, Marchand Global X Al-Noor. He paused for a moment, reading it like one might read a gravestone or a birth announcement. Then he smiled. Inside the room was different. No mahogany throne at the head of the table, no intimidating silence. Instead, the table had been rearranged into a circle. One long loop. Everyone saw everyone. No corners, no kings. Claire sat at the far end, or rather just another point along the curve, scribbling on a tablet, hair tied back, a coffee stain on her sleeve. She looked up, saw Gabriel, and lit up with the warmth of someone who'd forgotten how to fake smiles and finally remembered how to mean them. "Still carrying that lunchbox?" she asked. He raised it. It's state-of-the-art pink plastic. "You don't abandon tech like this." She laughed. "Ella's already inside." In the Innovation Hub, Claire nodded. "With Lucy. They're designing a peer-led ethics module. Something about power and humility in algorithmic systems. I asked them to dumb it down for the adults." Gabriel placed his briefcase beside the seat and paused before sitting. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked. Claire leaned back, thoughtful. "Sometimes, but mostly I think about how close we almost didn't make it." He nodded slowly. "Same." Meanwhile, in the repurposed lab, 2 floors below, Lucy sat beside Ella. Both girls hunched over a glowing screen, animated in whispers and bursts of laughter. Arabic phrases were scribbled across the whiteboard in looping handwriting. Lucy pointed at a line. "What does that mean?" Ella translated gently, "Trust isn't declared. It's demonstrated over time in small choices." Lucy blinked. "Sounds like my dad." Ella smiled. "Sounds like mine, too." A pause. Lucy looked at her. "You ever think we were chosen? Like, out of all the kids in the world?" Ella didn't hesitate. "No, I think we chose. We chose to stay, to speak, to keep building." She erased a word, then rewrote it, slower, steadier. "And I think choosing again every day is what makes us strong." Upstairs, the boardroom lights dimmed as the strategy session ended. New partners, old systems restructured, not perfect, but honest. Claire stood. "I have one last announcement," she said. Everyone looked up. Effective next quarter, Marchand Global will allocate 12% of annual net toward community-built oversight protocols designed, tested, and evaluated by third-party citizen engineers, including youth-led initiatives. Gasps, a few murmurs. One executive raised an eyebrow. "Claire, that's a huge leap." Claire nodded. "It's not a leap, it's a return. To why we ever deserved trust in the first place." She looked at Gabriel. He stood slowly, not commanding attention, but grounded in it. "We built systems that excluded the very people who kept them alive. That ends now." He glanced around the circle. "We're not here to protect an empire. We're here to make sure no one gets forgotten in its shadow." Someone whispered, "This place feels different." Gabriel met their eyes and said simply, "Because we finally let the janitor sit at the table." That evening, the building was quiet. The final sunbeam of the day fell across the hallway where 3 nameplates hung, not gold, not engraved, just brushed steel on wood. Claire Marchand, Director of Cultural Systems, Gabriel Cole, Strategic Culture Liaison, Ella Dawson, Systemic Ethics Architect. Beneath Ella's, a small hand-drawn fox had been pinned to the corkboard. No one dared remove it. Claire walked toward the exit coat draped over her arm when she passed the break room. Inside, she saw Gabriel. He was washing coffee mugs by hand, humming faintly. She smiled. "You know, we have a dishwasher now, right?" He looked up. Some habits die slowly. She stepped inside, folded her arms. "Thank you." "For what?" "For never backing down. For showing me that dignity can't be bought or buried." He dried a mug and set it down. "Thank you for listening," when it would have been easier not to. Claire nodded. "Then, we made it." Gabriel paused. "Not yet, but we're making it. That's what matters." Later that night, as they locked up the building, Ella stood at the front steps with Lucy beside her, looking up at the sign one last time. Lucy whispered, "What if it all disappears again?" Ella shook her head. "It won't, not if we leave the door open." Gabriel came up behind them and placed a gentle hand on each of their shoulders. Claire followed keys jingling in her hand, and together in the silence of a city that once didn't see them, they looked back one last time. No sirens, no applause, just light, soft and steady. Some build empires with power, others build trust in silence. And sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one who once cleaned it. If this story moved you the way it moved us, if it reminded you that dignity, kindness, and quiet strength can still change the world, then take a moment and let us know. Where are you watching from? We'd love to know what corner of the world you're in and how this story resonated with your heart. And if stories like this give you hope healing or just a reason to smile again, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon. There are so many more beautiful journeys ahead, and I'd be honored to share them with you. Thank you for watching. Your time, your presence, and your heart mean more than you know. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and keep believing in the quiet heroes.